The building had been emptied of people long before it was emptied of sound. Now it held only the wind, a thin, reedy breath slipping through broken windows and the gaps where the roof had caved. The old skating rink crouched at the edge of town like a forgotten confession, its neon sign blind, its parking lot a scab of cracked asphalt veined with winter grass. Every step Detective Aaron Hale took down the warped corridor seemed to wake something that preferred to stay sleeping. The faint click of his heel, the whisper of dust, the soft crackle of old posters peeling from the walls. Silence filled the rest, pressing close like it knew him, like it held his name. He paused just inside the main hall, letting his eyes adjust to the half-light. Faded murals curved around the rink, cartoon comets, smiling stars, a painted moon with lashes too long, all dulled beneath a gray skin of grime. The wooden guardrail that circled the rink drooped and splintered, sagging toward the floor like it had grown tired of being strong a long time ago. In the center of the rink, a single beam of pale afternoon light knifed through a missing panel in the ceiling, illuminating particles of dust that turned in slow, aimless spirals. Somewhere above, metal moaned, a roof bolt shifting with the wind's chill. The sound echoed, hollow, like a voice calling from another room that no one had lived in for decades. It smelled of mold and old sugar, the ghosts of spilled sodas, popcorn fat, teenage sweat. Aaron remembered when the place had been full, wheels on lacquered wood, shrieks of laughter, cheap music, the overlapping chatter of a town that still believed certain bad things happened in other places. Not here, not to them. He could still see her moving through the memory, a girl in a maroon sweater and denim skirt, skating in slow arcs, hair trailing like a dark ribbon behind her. She laughed once at something another girl said, and the sound had caught in his teenage chest and lodged there. He never worked it loose. Elena Maris Calder, 19, waitress at the diner off Route 9. Lived with her younger brother and a mother who smoked her heartbreak down to the filter. Disappeared one October night in 1974 after leaving this very rink, last seen near the back exit, where the light over the door had been out for months and no one got around to fixing it. He was 16 then, just a kid working the shoe counter, lacing skates, collecting damp, worn sneakers that smelled like nervous feet and cheap deodorant. He'd watched Elena pass the counter on her way out, her face flushed from skating, a wool coat thrown over her arm. She'd stopped, turned back as if she might say something. "Good night, Ellie," he'd managed, voice cracking around the edges. She'd smiled, eyes warm as lamplight. "Night, Hale." There was a moment, one heartbeat, maybe two, where he could have said more, offered to walk her out. Insisted, even. The parking lot had been darker than usual. The rumors about a blue pickup with out-of-state plates had already begun to curl their way into conversations, half joke, half warning. But he just stood there, hands buried in his apron pockets, mouth full of all the things he was too shy to risk. He watched her disappear toward the back hallway, the broken exit sign buzzing faintly overhead. That was the last time anyone admitted to seeing her. Now, 49 years later, he stood in the carcass of that same rink with a detective's badge pinned over the spot where a boy's second chances used to live. He traced the same thin path she'd taken that night, boots thumping softly on the warped boards. With each step, the past seemed to overlay the present like a double-exposed photograph. Her silhouette sliding ahead of him, intangible, forever just out of reach. The police had searched back then, not well enough, not long enough. The case file, what was left of it, spoke in the muffled language of small-town panic and slow, reluctant shame. Statements half taken, leads followed until they got uncomfortable, a handful of suspects that blurred into bad men, and then into nothing at all. He knew, more clearly than anyone, that the case had gone cold for reasons that had nothing to do with Winter. Aaron pushed open the back hallway door. It groaned in protest, then gave way, exhaling a breath of colder air and damp concrete. The corridor stretched ahead, fluorescent tubes dangling uselessly from the ceiling, their plastic covers shattered on the floor. A long black scuff marred the wall at hip height, like someone had knocked something heavy against it decades ago and nobody had cared enough to clean it. At the end of the hall waited the rusted metal door where Elena had vanished between one breath and the next. The paint flaked around the knob like a skin disease. His hand hovered just above it, fingers trembling slightly despite the years, despite the layers of training and cynicism he wore now instead of an apron. He had told himself for years that he remembered that night clearly, that his recollection was clean, sharp, reliable. But standing here in the lingering, breathless silence, something inside him shifted. Details bent, edges blurred. The memory of her face flickered, turning, fragments of light and shadow slipping through his grasp. Had she actually smiled? Or had his guilt painted that onto her later, to make the loss more exquisite, more punishing? The wind caught the back door just then, rattling it against the warped frame with a sudden, startling bang. The noise ricocheted down the empty hall, loud in the way that only lonely places could manage. Aaron flinched, his heart slamming into his ribs. Silence followed, heavier than before. Outside, the town of Elkhorn, Colorado, wore its winter like a confession, gray clouds braided low over the mountains, snow lurking along the edges of the world. Inside, in the brittle quiet of a dead rink, Aaron Hale realized he had never really left that October night. He'd just grown older around it. Somewhere behind him, the ghost of music stopped. The air stilled, listening. "Ellie," he whispered, the name breaking open in his throat. The sound went nowhere. Nothing answered. Only the silence, deep and waiting, as if it had been expecting him to come back. 2. Old Disappearance resurfaces after discovery of symbolic object. The call came 3 days earlier, on a Wednesday that tried and failed to feel ordinary. Morning frost still clung to the edges of the squad car windows when Aaron slid behind the wheel, coffee cooling too quickly in the cup holder. The town woke in stages outside, porch lights blinking off, trucks coughing to life, the diner's neon, open sign humming into its tired red glow. He'd been halfway through a minor burglary report when the dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, careful but edged with something faintly brittle. "Hale, you copy." He pressed the mic. "Go ahead." "Got a call from Public Works. Construction site out by the old Calder property. They found something, said you'd want to see it." Public Works found a lot of things: old septic lines, dead foxes, rusted car parts buried by floods and forgetfulness. None of them usually warranted the tone in her voice. "What is it?" A small pause, rustling papers. They said a necklace, in a box, old, looked like it had been buried a long time. The word settled into his chest like a stone dropped in deep water. Necklace. He knew before he admitted knowing. The brain was kind at first. It delayed the sharpness with a series of reasonable alternatives, flickering like cards shuffled in front of his eyes. Kids burying junk, some lost trinket from a long-gone family, coincidence. But the silence that followed over the radio told him none of those explanations were landing. "On my way," he said. The Calder property sat on the outskirts of town, where the valley began tilting up toward the mountains, pines thickening into a dark fringe. The house itself had been abandoned since the late 80s, after Elena's mother dried out, relapsed, and finally fled under the kind of quiet no one asked questions about. Over the years, the roof sagged, windows blew out, and the porch steps surrendered to rot. Teenagers spray-painted their names on the siding, broke into the empty rooms to drink cheap beer and dare each other to say Elena's name out loud in the dark. Recently, the land had been sold to some Denver developer who saw potential and views, where the town saw only worn-out ghosts. Bulldozers had already taken bites out of the surrounding field. Orange survey flags fluttered like warnings no one heeded. When Aaron pulled up, a yellow backhoe loomed in the pale light like a metal animal mid-pounce. A strip of police tape sagged between two rebar stakes. Two city workers stood near a churned-up patch of earth, their reflective vests dull against the winter-bleached grass. One of them, a man with cracked hands and a sun-crushed ball cap, nodded as Hale approached, but his eyes didn't quite meet the detective's. "Detective Hale, I'm Carlos, I made the call." "What'd you find?" Carlos lifted a gloved hand and pointed to a small folding table they dragged over from the truck. On it sat a clear evidence bag already dusted with a fine layer of soil. Inside, a small box rested like a heart in plastic skin. The box was metal, or had been once. Now it was the color of dried blood and rain, rust creeping along its edges, corners softened by time. A faint pattern lay beneath the corrosion, engraved swirls, floral maybe, or simply the suggestion of something once meant to be beautiful. Aaron felt his world contract, the margins of his vision darkening until there was only the bag, the box, and the steady, too loud thrum of his own pulse. "We hit it with the backhoe," Carlos said quietly. "Thought it was just scrap, but it was, I dunno. It felt out of place, I guess." "Where exactly?" Carlos gestured toward a shallow pit in the dirt, maybe 3 feet deep, the edges raw and damp. "About there, couple feet down. No bones or anything, just that." "Just that." Aaron pulled on nitrile gloves, their snap obscenely loud in the brittle morning air. He picked up the evidence bag with more care than he'd ever shown anything that didn't bleed. The metal was cold through the plastic. He recognized the shape before his memory allowed him to name it. A small rectangular jewelry box, the kind sold cheap in the 5 and dime back when those still existed, lined with velvety faux fabric that left red lint on fingertips. He remembered a display near the cash register, his 16-year-old hands hovering there, counting crumpled bills in his pocket and coming up short. He wanted to buy Elena one for her birthday. He remembered that now, the realization cutting clean through the fog, exposing something tender beneath. "Detective," Carlos asked, voice careful, "you all right?" Aaron cleared his throat. "Yeah, it came out rough thin. You open it." "Hell no," Carlos said, almost too quickly. "Felt like bad luck, figured that's your job." Aaron nodded and turned slightly away from them, putting the wind at his back. He addressed the box like a suspect, like an old love letter, like a wound. With steady fingers, he broke the flimsy metal latch and lifted the lid inside the bag. The air around him seemed to thicken, sound receding to a dull pressure, as if he ducked underwater. Inside the box, resting on a bed of rotted red velvet, lay a silver pendant on a thin, stained chain. The pendant was small, oval, and familiar, a pressed white flower under glass, its petals browned with age, anchored by a faint script etched around the edge. He did not have to read the words to know what they said. Memory supplied it unbidden. "Maris," he whispered. The name curled around his tongue like a prayer he'd once known by heart. He'd seen that necklace before, not in photos, not in evidence bags, on her. Around her throat, pale and warm, the small pendant catching the Rink lights as she bent to tie her skate laces, as she leaned over the counter to joke with him about the music, as she moved through the world like someone unaware of how little time she had left. Elena's mother had given it to her, some family keepsake, she'd said, from a grandmother across an ocean. Elena rarely took it off. And yet in the official file there been no mention of a necklace among her missing personal effects, no recovered jewelry, no note, no sign. But here it was, exhumed from shallow earth behind her family's sagging house, nearly half a century later, like the past had grown impatient waiting for them to look properly. Carlos shifted his weight. So, is it important? Aaron closed the lid, fingers trembling in a way he hoped they couldn't see. Yeah, he said softly, it's important. He straightened, feeling suddenly as if the horizon had tilted. The sky seemed too low, the clouds pressing down on the town on his shoulders. The Calder house hunched behind them, windows dark, siding flayed. It watched. In that moment, the old Disappearance was no longer just a cold file gathering dust in the back of his mind. It was here, hard and metallic and undeniably real, pushing through the thin skin of the present. He could almost hear the town's heartbeat quicken, the gossip coiling in kitchens and at gas pumps. The news would travel fast. Small towns had arteries made of rumor. Colorado 1974 cold case solved, arrests shocks community. He could see the headline already, printed in bold above a grainy photo of the Rink, the Calder house, maybe even of him. But the word solved felt arrogant, obscene, standing next to a name like hers. He bagged the box properly, logged the coordinates, asked the men to hold all work until further notice. The practicalities came automatic, muscle memory skipping over the raw nerve inside. But as he walked back to his car, the necklace's shape ghosted against his palm through the plastic. With each step, a thought rose, unwelcome and persistent, from the deepest part of him. Why here, why now? And beneath that, quieter, darker. What did we miss? The question settled into his bones, cold and heavy. It didn't feel like the past reaching for justice. It felt like it had come back for him. 3 investigator shows personal involvement, mixing duty with obsession. The conference room they gave him was too bright. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, merciless glare that made faces look older, papers look thinner, and truths look smaller than the weight they carried. The cold case file sat open on the table like an autopsy. Photographs curled at the corners, their black and white images paling toward yellow. Typed reports, smudged with fingerprints from hands long retired or long buried, lay beneath a fresh notepad and a steaming coffee. The present trying to domesticate the past. Aaron stood for a long time before sitting. Movement felt like agreement, like consent to re-enter a room he'd never truly left. When he finally dropped into the chair, it creaked in a way that reminded him of the rink's boards beneath skates, another ghostly overlay. On the top photograph, a young woman stared back at him from decades ago. Elena. The camera had caught her mid-turn, smile half-formed, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that had already started to escape. Someone had taken the photo at a church picnic, according to the note on the back. In the background, paper plates and plaid blankets blurred into anonymity. He traced her image without touching it, his finger hovering just above the glossy surface. "You're not technically supposed to be primary on this," Captain Monroe said from the doorway, voice low, judgment wrapped in concern. "Conflict of interest." Aaron didn't look up. "I was 16. I worked at the Rink. That's not a conflict, it's history." "History is another word for baggage," Monroe replied, stepping into the room. The captain was his age, maybe a year older, but carried himself like someone who'd made different choices, taken fewer ghosts home. "You sure you can be objective here?" A humorless smile tugged at the corner of Aaron's mouth. Objectivity's a nice word for distance. Nobody was objective then, and look how that turned out. Monroe sighed, dragging out the chair across from him. It scraped the floor, a thin, grating sound. The DA's office is already circling. They see headlines and re-election campaigns. They're gonna want a clean narrative if this goes anywhere. No loose ends. No messy emotional attachments. Victims are messy emotional attachments, Aaron murmured. That's the whole point. The captain studied him for a moment. You knew her. It wasn't a question. Aaron finally raised his eyes. The room's fluorescent light pushed harsh reflections into Monroe's pupils, making it hard to read him. I knew everyone, Aaron said. Small town, you know that. But you remember her. He hesitated, the pause heavy enough to answer. He felt Monroe's gaze, weighing, measuring the thin line between personal and professional. It had always been a line Aaron walked poorly. He thought of the necklace, now locked in evidence, tagged and numbered. Of the way his throat had closed around the word Maris out in that field, as if his body remembered how to grieve before his mind officially allowed it. I remember what they did to her, he said finally, or what they didn't bother to do to find out. Monroe leaned back, chair complaining. Look, Hale, nobody's questioning your skill. Hell, you're the best we've got at pulling sense out of old bones. I just don't want. He cut himself off, jaw tightening, searching for the right arrangement of words that wouldn't sound paternal or patronizing. He failed. Don't let this eat you alive. Aaron's laugh was short, soft, and completely humorless. You're late with that advice. Something flickered across Monroe's face, sympathy, maybe, or surrender. Fine, you're on it, but I'm putting Mills on the paperwork as co-lead. On paper, she's the primary. For the DA. For the optics. You do the work, she takes the heat if this goes sideways. Paper doesn't solve cases, Aaron said. No, Monroe agreed quietly, but it can get them buried. I'm trying to prevent that. The captain left, the door sighing shut behind him. The room felt larger and smaller at the same time, the air thickening with old cigarette smoke that wasn't there, with voices that had spoken these same names and dates in 1974, and then gone home to sleep. Alone again, Aaron pulled the file closer. Each page had the weight of a confession interrupted. Witness statements. He read the familiar lines, the ones he'd memorized over the years by sheer proximity. Last seen leaving the rink around 10:45 p.m. Wearing maroon sweater, denim skirt, tan coat, brown boots. Planning to walk home, approximately 1.2 miles. Weather clear, cold. No reported storms. An entire life reduced to bullet points and approximations. He flipped to his own statement, the one he'd given as a kid, hands shaking, voice cracking, heart pounding in his ears. The photocopy had softened the ink, but his words remained fossilized. She said good night. She left alone. No, I didn't see anyone with her. He stared at the neat, blocky letters he'd forced onto the page back then, like good handwriting might make the truth behave. Something in his gut twisted. Did she leave alone? He remembered her walking down the corridor. He remembered not following. He remembered the broken light above the exit, humming weakly. He remembered the taste of wanting to say more, of not saying it. But suddenly, the hallway in his memory seemed more crowded than it used to be. A shadow in the corner, maybe. A shape near the door. Someone leaning against the vending machine just out of focus. The brain filled in gaps. He knew that. He'd told victims, relatives that for years, gently explaining why their recollections shifted like sand. Memory was not a photograph. It was a story you kept telling yourself until you believed it. So what story had he been telling? He stared at the line. No, I didn't see anyone with her. What if that had never been entirely true? What if it had only been safe? A dull ache pulsed behind his eyes. He rubbed at his temple, then reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, his own notes from that morning. Not official, not for the file, for him. Possible explanations for necklace. Buried by perpetrator post-crime. Buried by family member guilt-shame. Buried by Elena symbolic act. The last line trailed off. He hadn't been able to finish the thought. He added another question beneath, the handwriting more jagged. Why hide what was never officially found? The fluorescent light buzzed louder, or maybe his head just amplified it. The room's edges seemed to soften, as if he were looking through glass that had been breathed on. He saw himself at 16 again, watching Elena walk away. But now the scene played on a loop, each repetition slightly altered. In one version, the hall was empty behind her. In another, someone stood at the end, a shape, a shoulder, a glimpse of a blue jacket. In yet another, she paused, turning back not toward him but toward that shadowed figure, her expression unreadable but not afraid. "Stop," he murmured, pressing thumb and forefinger into the corners of his eyes until stars burst behind his lids. Obsession didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in through hairline cracks, disguised as diligence, as responsibility, as debt long overdue. He told himself he owed her this, that if he just worked harder, looked longer, dove deeper, he could rewrite the failure of a town too scared to see itself clearly. He also knew, in a place he rarely acknowledged, that he was trying to save his younger self too. The boy who hadn't followed her. The boy who'd said no, I didn't see anyone with her instead of I don't know what I saw and that scares me. His phone vibrated on the table, skittering slightly. A text from Mills. MEGAN-MILLS. Got the lab rush on the necklace. Prints likely degraded. Will know more soon. You okay? He stared at the question. 3 small words. Too large, too late. His thumb hovered over the screen before he typed back. Hale. I'm fine. The lie tasted familiar. He set the phone aside and leaned over the file again, pulling it closer until the words blurred into gray rivers. He read until the past and present fused, until the date stopped meaning anything, until 1974 felt like yesterday and yesterday felt like it had happened before he was born. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, whitening the parking lot, muffling the town. Inside, under harsh lights, Detective Aaron Hale slid, inch by inch, from duty toward something far more treacherous. Not just a case. A reckoning. Megan Mills found him in the hallway outside evidence, whispering to himself. Not audibly, not quite, just the faint movement of lips that gave the impression of a man trying to translate the language of ghosts. She didn't interrupt. She knew better. Mills had learned the hard way that Hale was one of those investigators whose mind moved like water beneath ice, slow at the surface, fast and dangerous underneath. Thought I might find you here, she finally said. He straightened, the tension in his shoulders cracking like old plaster. Just checking chain of custody. You've checked it 3 times. Then once more won't break it. Her sigh was soft, nearly fond. Come on, you should eat. He didn't move. She looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Concern. Fear, maybe. Not fear of him, but for him. You've been at this for years, haven't you? Even before they assigned you anything official. He said nothing. That's what I figured. They walked down the corridor toward the squad room, the overhead lights flickering with the faint buzz of dying transformers. The building was old enough to have its own moods, its own aches. Sometimes, Hale thought, the place seemed to echo the people working inside it, cracking when they cracked, groaning under the weight of their secrets. As they passed the break room, a tall, raw-boned man leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. Deputy Ray Calder, Elena's nephew. Born decades after her disappearance, raised on the story like a bedtime warning whispered by adults who never healed. "You find something?" Ray asked, eyes sharp, voice too cool. Hale froze for a moment. Mills placed a gentle hand at his back. "We just got preliminary lab notes," she told Ray. "They're running a secondary analysis. Nothing we can share yet." Ray's gaze shifted to Hale. "Let me guess, he's calling the shots." Hale met his stare steadily. "This isn't about shots." Ray snorted. "For you it is, always was. My dad told me how you looked at her, like she hung the moon, like you expected her to notice." "Ray," Mills warned. But Ray wasn't done. "You think you're the only one who wants answers. My family's been living in that shadow for 50 years. 50. He stabbed a finger toward the cold case hallway. "You think digging this up makes you the hero? You think she'd even remember you?" Hale flinched just barely, but Ray caught it. "She liked him," Mills said, voice careful. "That's in the statements." "Sure," Ray muttered. "She liked a lot of people." The sentence hung in the air like smoke, the kind that stings the eyes. Ray shoved off the doorway and walked past them, boots heavy on the linoleum. When he turned the corner, the air seemed to loosen, but the damage lingered like a bruise. "You okay?" Mills asked. "No," Hale said, "but that's not new." They reached the squad room. A small cluster of desks, chairs all slightly mismatched, papers stacked at the edges like geological layers of procedural exhaustion. On the central whiteboard, Mills had begun mapping names and dates in precise green marker. "Look," she said, circling a name with delicate force. "This person keeps coming up in old witness statements. Not as a suspect, more like someone who was around, always around, but never formally interviewed." "Daniel Kerr," Hale murmured, "worked maintenance at the Rink and lived 2 houses down from the Calder place. He left town after graduation, joined the military, came back in early 80s, records thin after that. Agitated when asked about Elena," she said, according to one old interview summary. Hale felt the familiar shift inside him, the tightening in the chest, the quickening of breath, signals he'd learned to disguise as thoughtfulness. Something about Kerr had always bothered him, a sense of proximity too neat, too easy to overlook. But the real gravity came from the knowledge that at 16, Hale himself had never noticed Kerr at all. Not until after. Memory, he thought, is a cruel archivist. Mills placed a file beside him. "His sister still lives in town, Martha Kerr. Maybe she knows where he is." Hale nodded. "I'll talk to her." "We," Mills corrected, sliding on her coat. As they walked outside, the evening had thickened into a kind of twilight bruise, purple smudging the horizon, mountains darkening like a set of closed eyes. Snow on the sidewalks crusted into uneven ridges. The cold tightened everything, breath, muscle, intention. They drove to the Kerr house in silence, not the comfortable kind, but the fraught variety that builds pressure under the ribs. When Martha answered the door, her face tightened as though bracing for a blow she had been expecting for half her life. "I knew this day would come," she whispered, stepping aside. "Come in." Inside, the living room smelled faintly of lavender and old carpet, a scent that reminded Hale of library corners and abandoned bedrooms. Family photos lined the mantel, each framed image slightly askew, like they had shifted under the weight of time. "Is Daniel in trouble?" Martha asked. "We just want to locate him," Mills said gently. Martha swallowed hard, her hands twisted in her sweater. He's not well. He hasn't been well for years, comes and goes, talks to things, voices in the walls, people who aren't there. Is he dangerous? Mills asked. Only to himself. Hale leaned forward. Does he ever talk about the rink? Her eyes flickered. That single, tiny movement told Hale everything. Sometimes, she admitted. He says he hears her, a girl humming, sometimes crying. Did he ever say her name? A tremor moved through Martha's shoulders. No, but he keeps something, keeps it under his bed, a shoebox. Her voice cracked. I found it once. Inside was ribbons, a photograph, a button from a coat, things that looked like they belonged to someone else. Hale's pulse skidded painfully. Do you still have it? Martha shook her head. He took it with him last winter, right before he disappeared again. When was the last time you saw him? 3 weeks ago. Where does he go? Sometimes, she whispered, back there. Hale froze. Back where? Her voice was barely breath. The rink. In that moment the room seemed to lean inward, shadows bending, walls listening. The past tightened its grip. Ray Calder's accusations echoed in Hale's head. Mills' concern pressed behind his ribs. Martha's trembling fingers pulled invisible threads of dread. But under all of it, beneath the surface of duty, was something far more personal. If Daniel Kerr had taken keepsakes, if he had returned to the rink, if he heard Elena's voice, then Hale was no longer retracing her steps. He was walking toward someone else's memory of her. And that, he realized, was far more dangerous. 5. Symbolic clues, photos, diary, patterns build intellectual intrigue. The shoebox was their first lead. Not a solid one, not evidence yet, but a symbol. One of those totems around which truth coils like smoke before becoming visible. They found it 3 days later, exactly where Martha said he sometimes slept. In the crawlspace beneath the old community center, a place Hale remembered only as a dusty storage pit filled with broken folding chairs and forgotten banners. The air down there was colder than winter should allow. Their flashlights cut thin beams through the gloom, revealing cobwebs stretched like trembling nets across the low ceiling. There, Mills whispered, pointing. Half buried in dust lay a tattered shoebox secured by 2 loops of fraying twine. Hale lifted it with the same reverence he'd used with the necklace box. Something about objects left behind, objects carried, objects hidden, felt like listening to a person's breath long after they'd stopped speaking. He carried it into the light. Inside, items lay arranged with the painstaking care of a shrine. Not madness, not chaos, ritual. First, a photograph, Polaroid, edges softened by decades of being touched, held, maybe spoken to. A picture taken inside the rink. Hale recognized the painted comets on the walls, the reflection of the disco ball, the lacquered boards. But the shot wasn't centered. The camera had caught a figure half turned away, hair in motion, sweater maroon. Elena, or someone wearing her sweater. Only the blur kept her from becoming whole. Beside it, a ribbon the color of midnight knotted at one end. A small white button with a faint crack. A torn piece of paper with the corner of an address barely legible. And lastly, something that made Hale's chest tighten, a diary page, torn from a spiral notebook, written in a hurried hand. He angled it toward the light. Oct 12, 1974. She was there again. She saw me. I know she saw me. She smiled, but it wasn't for me. It's not fair. She shouldn't look at him like that. He doesn't deserve her. He never will. I'll keep her safe. I'll fix it. I'll fix it before he ruins it. Mills exhaled slowly. This isn't Daniel's handwriting, too controlled, too young. Hale read the last sentence again. Before he ruins it. His throat went dry. Who is he? Maybe someone from the rink, a friend, a rival. No, Hale murmured, pulse stuttering. This tone, this is jealousy, resentment. Mills understood immediately. You think this is about you? No, a pause, maybe. He couldn't tear his eyes from the words. There was something disturbingly familiar about the spacing, the shape of the loops, the slope of the letters, and that terrified him. Mills flipped the page gently, but the back was blank. They sealed each item carefully, tagged and logged them, but the psychological weight remained raw and immediate, like a bruise blooming under the skin. Later that night, Hale spread copies across his kitchen table. Snow tapped against the window like fingernails. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies the smallest breath. He studied the Polaroid first. The blur of Elena, or the girl, pulled him backward into memory, but the angle of the shot unnerved him. It wasn't taken by someone standing casually at the rink, too low, slightly tilted, almost as if taken from behind a doorway through a crack. He remembered the rink's maintenance closet across from the back hall, the one with the busted latch kids used to hide in during break-the-rules games. The closet that faced the lane Elena took the night she vanished. If the photo were taken from inside it. He set it down quickly. The diary page pulled him next. He traced the ink without touching it. Jealousy, possessiveness, fixation. And that word again, fix. Not hurt. Not take. Not punish. Vix. A delusion guaranteeing righteousness. He scribbled notes. Who was the writer? Age. Relationship to Elena. Before he ruins it, who? Why jealousy toward me? Did I ever speak to this person? Do I even remember them? Memory raised its trembling head again. He pressed fingers to his temples. Shadows flickered at the edges of vision. He knew obsession when he saw it, had counseled families about it, investigated crimes shaped by it, watched it consume unstable minds. But the disturbing question lingered like a heartbeat in the dark. Why did the handwriting feel so hauntingly familiar? The snow thickened outside, smothering everything in white. Hale stared at the objects spread before him, each one a shard of a mirror reflecting a distorted version of the past. He wasn't learning more about Elena. He was learning more about the people who had seen her through their own broken lenses. And terrifyingly, he was learning more about himself. 6. Twist questions investigators' perception, blurring truth and delusion. It began with a dream. Not an unusual one. Hale had replayed that night so many times that dreams were simply reruns of memories he couldn't outrun. But this dream was different. This time, he wasn't watching Elena leave the rink. He was watching himself watching her. He saw his 16-year-old self leaning on the counter, hands buried in an apron, face tense, eyes fixed not on the corridor but on someone just beyond the frame of memory. A boy. A boy Hale didn't recognize. The dream him whispered something, but Hale couldn't hear it. The boy turned, half smiling, and the lights flickered, and suddenly the face changed, blurred, dissolved. He woke gasping, heart thundering. When he sat up, the room swayed. The shadows on the wall seemed slightly wrong, like they'd rearranged themselves while he slept. He rubbed his face. Dreams distort, stress distorts, obsession distorts. But something about that boy, his posture, the tilt of his head, felt disturbingly like an echo he had once ignored. The next morning, he returned to the rink alone. Mills had taken a shift with the lab techs. Monroe had warned him, again, not to go wandering into old crime scenes without backup. He didn't care. The rink was colder than before. Moisture beaded on the walls. Frost gathered at the cracks in the boards. The silence pressed harder, thicker. He walked to the maintenance closet, the one that would have offered the angle in the Polaroid. The door stuck at first, then groaned open. Inside, the smell of old wood and mildew wrapped around him. He crouched. The air tasted stale, metallic. He imagined a teenager crouched here with a Polaroid camera, watching, waiting, breathing shallow to avoid being heard. But then another thought intruded, sharp, intrusive. What if the photographer wasn't hiding? What if the photographer had a reason to be here? A work reason. A job. He felt a chill at the base of his skull. 16-year-old Hale had worked at the rink, cleaning shifts, stocking, repairs. He'd had keys to everything. The thought slammed into him with cold clarity. I could have been in here. His breath hitched. He lurched backward, steadying himself against the doorframe. No, he whispered. Memory tried to reassemble itself, but each piece shifted, refusing to click into place. He remembered checking skates, wiping down rental counters, sweeping floors. But could he remember where he was every moment of that night? Could anyone? His hands trembled. He forced himself to breathe, think. He pictured Elena again, the maroon sweater, the faint smile, her turning back toward. Toward who? Had it been him? Had it been someone else? Had he imagined her smiling at all? His heart hammered, the room tilted, shadows along the hallway pulsed like something alive. He stumbled out into the open rink, fighting the thrum in his ears. The necklace had surfaced in a field behind her house. The shoebox had surfaced in a place Care had slept. But the diary page hadn't mentioned names. And the line, before he ruins it. What if it wasn't about jealousy between teenage boys? What if the writer believed someone was hurting Elena? Someone she trusted. Someone she talked to. Someone who hovered just a bit too long at the skate counter. He dropped to one knee, gripping the guardrail. His breath turned shallow, white puffs curling in the cold. The Polaroid, the diary, the memories. All broken, all incomplete, all open to interpretation. Mills had asked him yesterday, quietly, "Are you sure you remember her the way she was, and not the way you needed her to be?" He hadn't answered. Now in the hollowed-out quiet of the rink, the question echoed again. He saw flickers, Elena laughing with friends, Elena skating alone, Elena leaning on the counter to talk to him, Elena brushing hair behind her ear as she spoke to someone else entirely. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Stop," he whispered, "stop." But the silence responded with a suggestion, not a voice, not words, just a pressure against his thoughts. What if you're not the observer? What if you're the missing piece? He staggered to his feet and backed toward the exit. His breath came short and fast. Every shadow stretched, reaching. Every memory curled inward, defensive. His perception had begun to fracture. Past and present drifted apart. His memories felt rehearsed, worn from retelling, polished into something convenient. What if the truth wasn't lost? What if he'd buried it? The door slammed behind him as he fled into the snow. 7. Ending feels haunting and unresolved. Truth brings no peace. The arrests came a week later. Not one, but two names that had circled the case like vultures but never landed. Daniel Care, found shivering behind the old cannery, shoebox clutched to his chest, and Thomas Weller, a former Rink employee who had vanished from records after 1974 but never quite left town. His fingerprints matched an item inside the shoebox. A jacket button, a scrap of the diary paper. The DA assembled a narrative the public could swallow. Two men, shared obsession, a violent act blurred by panic, a rushed burial, silence that calcified into history. The headline hit the weekly paper like a hammer. Colorado 1974 cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. People wept, people cheered, some prayed. Closure, they called it. Justice, they hoped. But Hale knew better. He stood alone in the parking lot outside the station as dusk draped the mountains in bruised violet. Snow muttered along the pavement. The cold tasted of metal. Mills approached him carefully, steps soft, as though nearing a wounded animal. "You should go home," she said. "I did," he murmured. "Didn't feel like home." "You did good work, Hale. You got answers." "Did I?" She hesitated. "We arrested the people responsible." "Maybe," he said, "maybe not." She didn't press further. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't ask why his hands still trembled or why his eyes looked like they'd seen something he refused to name. He wasn't sure he could speak it aloud anyway. When she left, Hale turned slowly toward the distant shadow of the rink. The building crouched beneath the falling snow like a memory refusing burial. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, the Polaroid surfaced again, the blurred figure, the faint reflection, the angle. And behind it, other images, shifting, mutating, memories that might not be memories at all. A girl smiling. A boy watching. A closet door slightly ajar. A camera. Hands trembling. A breath held too long. A shadow that might have been his. Or someone else. Or both. The snow deepened. The cold pressed closer. Somewhere a siren wailed, distant, meaningless. The truth was a fragile thing, softened by time, sharpened by guilt, warped by longing. He didn't know whose memories he'd been excavating anymore. He didn't know which parts belonged to Elena, which to her killers, which to witnesses, and which, terrifyingly, to himself. The arrests had tied a bow around a story that demanded a beginning, middle, and end. But truth does not bow. It lingers, it haunts. And sometimes it waits for the person who least wants to find it. Hale inhaled the cold until it stung. "Ellie," he whispered. No answer. Only the snow. Only the dark. Only the endless, echoing silence. Closure was for the living. But peace. Peace was for no one. Not here. Not now. Not ever. The case was closed. But Hale was not. And somewhere in the hollow spaces between memory and fact, between longing and guilt, he knew. Some part of the past was still watching him,